Welcome back. An incredible story about the newspaper business and where we are today. The editors of the Denver Post used the entire opinion page to slam their own paper's owner. Several other critical articles also appeared in the Daily. By the way, the paper of record in Denver here. Now, they're livid about the job cuts and cost cutting. This image says it all. On the left, you have the editorial staff 5 years ago, nearly 150 journalists. On the right, you have who's left. The 125-year-old paper is a shell of what it used to be. And the editors, they're slamming the hedge fund who owns it. Quote, "We call for action. If Alden isn't willing to do good journalism here, it should sell the Post to owners who will. A news organization like ours ought to be seen, especially by our owner, as a necessary public institution vital to the very maintenance of our grand democratic experiment. Here in Colorado, Alden has embarked on a cynical strategy of constantly reducing the amount and quality of its offerings while steadily increasing its subscription rates. In doing so, the hedge fund managers, often tellingly referred to as vulture capitalists, have hidden behind a narrative that adequately staffed newsrooms and newspapers can no longer survive in the digital marketplace. We take the movement and moment to acknowledge fundamental truths. When newsroom owners view profits as the only goal, quality, reliability, and accountability suffer. Their very mission is compromised. The course correction that needs to come from the benefit of communities across the land depends on owners committed to serving their readers and viewers and users." Now, it is worth noting that it's not all bad news for print news. The paper added 160,000 digital subscribers in just the past quarter. I'm talking about the Times now. It also has 2.5 million people paying to click on the Times site. It's raked in $1 billion in total subscription revenue. That is a record for the Gray Lady, which has been around for more than 150 years. Also, Palm Beach Post, Palm Beach Daily News, they were just acquired for $50 million. Big number for a relatively small paper, small market. So, and obviously you look at what happened with the Washington Post here, where Bezos not only bought it, funded it, but it's actually been profitable and certainly vital in the last year and a half, given the political cycle and doings, as we just articulated in the last segment. But you lived through this. Without embarrassing you, you were and are the biggest columnist that paper and this market has seen.
Yeah. Thank you.
And they still parted company with, no, really. I thought it was stupid at the time, and I'll say it right now, but okay. Do you think that there is, well, first let's talk about the Denver Post.
Yeah.
Should it be viewed like every other business, that it's a bottom line? People have changed. Newspapers aren't consumed like they were my father or my grandfather's generation. They're different now. Or does there have to be a public trust? And if papers aren't there to look after it, it can't just be about the bottom line.
Right. You just hit on the two words I was thinking of, public trust. And there is a responsibility for local newspapers, mid-sized papers which are really in danger, as opposed to the Washington Post and New York Times, even though they've suffered. There is a public trust that these papers are given to serve the communities. I can tell you that lots of newspapers used to be family-owned. There's a great nostalgia about that, and there was a patriarch or a matriarch that ran those papers, and the public trust aspect of it was front and center. Even though they made profits, they didn't make the 30%, 40% profits that they started making when they went public. A lot of newspapers went public in the 80s and the 90s, and it no longer became the people in your community you were serving shareholders in Dubuque, and that's a lot different from
and for somebody who says,
your own
oh,
people.
why care? I get my news on the web. I tell a story. I used to go 20-something years ago. I'm getting old, but I went up to Albany to cover some state of the whatever, and the filing room, about 20-something chairs. You had to fight to get a seat if you got in there to file.
Yeah.
I went there a couple of years ago. Gannett, which owns multiple papers throughout this market, had one person there.
Yeah.
Times had somebody, and the other dailies from the city never even sent anybody up.
Yeah.
How in God's name, if you in less than one hand can count for New York here, we're not talking about Wyoming, to cover, especially some of the corruption we got going on in Albany, no one's minding the story anymore.
Well, the statistics are stark. You pointed, you had that little graphic with the people in the Denver Post. This is an amazing thing. Since 1990, I just looked this up today, the number of jobs in newsrooms declined by 60%.
Wow.
60%. I mean, just think of that. So you don't have people from, different city newspapers even covering Washington like they used to.
And the dirty secret is, the first ones they let go were the ones who actually knew the market the most, who obviously cost the most here.
Yeah,
and
that's
then
right.
It's not just the numbers that got cut, but also the experience, the relationships, the person who knew how things worked or didn't work.
Institutional memory, and the worst part of it is you need new blood. You need new blood. You need younger people to be in the news business. You need them, but you also need them to be mentored and taught and given some guidance by people that are running running the organization. That ain't happening
Let me ask
anymore.
you a personal question.
It just is not happening.
Personal question, if you would.
Sure.
Your son is a reporter, but he's a TV reporter.
That's right.
Okay, and a good one too. All things equal, when he was growing up, did he want to be a print guy like you?
I know he wanted to get into the business, but I think he, and of course, people say, "Well, you got to stop him," like that. But I couldn't. But and I think he started out in print. And I think he knew that probably the best direction would be to go to online and some television. He's doing multiple platforming, as we call it,
So we've identified the problem and the impact, but you can't find a Jeff Bezos who's willing to take a loss if need be to buy a paper, or find somebody who's willing to make it a charity for themselves or a loss leader. So what's the solution?
Why do you state that as fact? I think there's more people out there. Look, Carlos Slim was going to do that with the Times.
Right.
And there are more people out there. Look in Denver.
If there were, wouldn't they be doing it?
Well, that's what they're all looking for. See, I think that's what the gamble was with this Denver Post thing. They're looking for that benevolent billionaire, which they, by the way, this happened in L.A., the L.A. Times. There was a bit of a revolt there, too, with the ownership there being this Tronc. That's actually their name, believe it or not. Tronc, and they said, "Please sell, we hate you," and everything else. And they did. But we don't know what the
we're still talking about
result would be.
bigger cities in the country. I mean, there was a Politico report this weekend that talked about news deserts, communities and counties that have no local newspaper, and then actually the impact, or there's a correlation between the lack of newspaper subscriptions in a county and how they voted in presidential elections. So there's clearly an impact. But what are you supposed to do for Asheville, North Carolina, or what are you supposed to do for an even smaller city like the Quad Cities in Iowa and Illinois?
AOL started like a patch, right? So they
but that
were
doesn't
online.
seem to
I can tell you more than any of you will ever
But they
want to
were
know
more
about
local.
this. The point was they started off with the idea of being hyper-localism, but
Right.
the cost attached to it was so prohibitive that it went from being one in every town to one for a county, and it really could never replace what the papers at their heydays were. I think you have things like ProPublica, which are privately funded groups who do investigative journalism. The dirty secret of all this is investigative journalism is the biggest one to suffer. And for when somebody busts a mine for not having safety standards and whatever else, or dirty water, those things don't get covered anymore because it costs money and it takes time. But that's where you get the public, outcry when things go south, because no one's watching here and no one has time to spend a week on a story.
I also think that the public trust, again, has been sort of compromised by the idea that different news organizations take one political slant.
Yeah.
And it's so if you're going to do investigative reporting, it should be without fear or favor. Remember that line? And not pretty much geared just to one niche group of people that have a political point of view. It should be, there's a credibility gap, which has contributed, I think, somewhat to the problem.
The risk of what I'm saying, there is a downside to it, but I do think the recruitment of the benevolent billionaire or multi-millionaire, especially in markets that don't have it, would be the greatest public service they can do, especially if, like Bezos, they stay out of the editorial of the paper. They just write the checks.
Should they be calling you rich?
I got my own problems. All right, coming up next, Westchester. They're helping people get second chances. If you get out of jail, it's hard, as everybody knows, to get a job, and then you see recidivism. Well, now people who have served their time will have a better shot at succeeding on the outside. Block the box, it's called. We'll explain what it is and debate if it's a good or a bad idea.